Thank you to everyone for being here this evening. We're going to try to respect your time because everyone's giving of it. Come on, Ms. Burke, give me your principal best of how you rally the troops. You can hear my voice. My voice.
That's why the arts are so important.
Thank you, everyone. On behalf of the Mayor's Office, I want to welcome you all tonight. This is the welcome portion of our agenda. I'm Kim Bridges. I'll be facilitating the meeting this evening, and I want to make sure that we all have ample time to get to know one another and to hear some of the great information we're going to have from our facilitator from the Forum for Youth Investment, Elizabeth Gaines, who fearlessly drove away from a winter storm in D.C. to be with us this evening. So we want to thank Elizabeth for her time and her expertise and make sure that she gets enough time to cover a bit of great information and background on children's cabinets. I want to make sure that we all have a moment to introduce ourselves, and I'm going to kick that off with the other two designees from the Mayor's Office. Thad, you want to start us off on just a quick round of names and titles?
Sure. I'm Thad Williamson, Senior Policy Advisor in the Office of Mayor LeVar Stoney.
And hi, I'm Osita Irwavely, Senior Policy Advisor for LeVar Stoney, and it's my second day, so be gentle.
My name is Kelly Chokris. I'm with the Robbins Foundation.
Cynthia Newbill, 7th District City Council Representative and Vice President of City Council.
Cheryl Burke. I was getting ready to say principal. District 7 School Board Interim Member. Thank you.
Willie Hilliard, Swearing Citizen Third. Yes, my title is Brooklyn, President of Brooklyn Park Area Association.
Delicia Johnson, Brooklyn Public School Parent, HCA Physician Nurse.
Kristen Larson, City Council, 4th District.
I am Lynette Plummer, RPS, proud RPS parent, and Executive Assistant to our Attorney General and Chief Deputy Attorney General, Cynthia Hudson.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Michael Jones, Councilman of the 9th District and Chair of the Education and Health and Human Services Committee on City Council.
And I'm Linda Owen, I'm 9th District School Board Representative.
Bob Argybright, Board Chair of Groundwork RVA and Community Advocate in the Bill Mead South Road Community.
Good afternoon. I'm Andrew Dare, Dean of the VCU School of Education.
Hi, I am Bone Seymour with the Richmond Region League of United Latin American Citizens.
I'm Rodney Robinson. I'm the current Richmond Public Schools Teacher of the Year.
A. Ramon Moore, President of the Richmond Education Association.
Superintendent Cameron?
Hi, I'm Jason Cameron, Superintendent, RPS.
Hi, Michelle Udasco. I'm Jason's Chief of Staff.
And we'd love to welcome community members, interested folks, members of the media. Would y'all like to introduce yourself? No pressure.
Hi, I'm Gustavo Angeles, I'm a community organizer.
I'm Megan Potter, reporter with WCBE.
I'm Kenita Bowers, Director of Communications and Media Relations for Richmond Public Schools.
Ron Carrington, reporter for the Richmond Free Press.
And our fabulous videographer.
I'm Wes Jones with the Office of the Press Secretary.
The video of this meeting will be posted on the website that is containing all of the information on the Education Compact. If you all haven't seen that link yet, I'll make sure you get it afterwards. It's already got the start of documentation from these meetings and this structure. Just want to walk you through this evening, and my role is primarily timekeeper, so that we do respect your time and make sure that we all get out of here at a reasonable hour before snow starts coming our way. And to give you just a preview of the last agenda item around one of the first initiatives of the city education compact structure, the mayor's out of school time plan. But with that being said, I just wanted to make sure you were aware of a couple of things. Obviously, the videography that we've just mentioned. In addition to that, The logistical details of restrooms. The ladies' room is a hard right out of this door to your right, and the men's room is just past the elevators to your right. If anyone needs that at any point, feel free. And extra waters are available also if anyone needs additional hydration this evening. We do want to make sure you're not too comfortable in these seats and that you get to know someone beside the person right beside you. So for the next 10 minutes, what we're going to do, whoops, that was my timer for intros. So we're right on time.
You're a marvel.
Thanks. What I'd like to ask you to do is to go across the room to somebody that you're not sitting immediately adjacent to, or even a couple of folks down from, someone that you may not know. And that can be in groups of 2 or 3 or 4, up to y'all. But what we do for 10 minutes is, you know now each other's names and each other's titles. What I'd love for you to be able to do is talk to one another about perhaps a student that maybe you have at home, or maybe you know from Richmond Public Schools, or maybe a child that you've worked with in your community in one of your other roles that you think of when you think about the work that a group that's committed to the whole child can do. I will keep it as open as that.
Wow.
Talk with someone about, and obviously we're talking about real people, so first names only. Any student that comes to mind when you think about why you're here, working on issues around the needs of every child all day, inside and outside of school. With that, go, and I will time give you a few minutes to get to know one another. How are you? One thing I want to invite you to do, because this is an organization that exists to support the whole child, is you've got yourself on one side of the name tent, but to write the name of that student or a student who comes to mind for you on the other side of your name tent, and we will keep using those so that you always have a student perspective and a real world student in the front of you when you're making decisions and talking and discussing together about the needs of the home child. This is not supposed to be abstract work. This is real people, real issues. And if you choose not to do that, just feel free to pass the pen around. Also want to make sure we introduce Liz, who joined us, and I thought someone else came in.
That's how it happens.
Liz, we did quick intros of name and title at the beginning.
Oh, I'm Liz Dorr, and I'm the school board rep for the first district.
Councilwoman Larson.
Oh, yes.
I didn't introduce myself.
You did?
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Did we miss anyone else?
I just came in. I'm Shelley Warshaw, and I'm a part of the company.
Yes, please come anywhere up here. Yes.
Your name.
Yeah, your name tag's over there.
Okay. Thank you all, and Thad is going to walk us through the next item on our agenda.
Slouching.
6 or 7 good.
Yeah. All right, let's Shelley go. Come on in.
Thank you.
So, I just want to give a quick overview of the structure of the Education Compact as a whole, and then also talk a little bit briefly about the why of all this and why we're asking you to commit your time, which we really appreciated. I mean, to me, this is a really exciting night because we're doing something new in Richmond that really literally has not been done before. Trying to bring the governing bodies together with the community to have a holistic conversation about education and kids in the context of social conditions in the city of Richmond. So it's really exciting, and I think it's been literally 51 weeks since we first took this out to the community to get feedback, and it's been an interesting process, but we've gotten there, and definitely want to acknowledge Dr. Newbill, Council, and Jones, Ms. Dorr, who've been part of it from literally the very, very beginning in helping conceptualize this. But obviously everyone on the school board and council has contributed to it and endorsed it. Obviously, it doesn't happen without Mayor Estonia, so acknowledge him in his absence as well. But really our goal was we wanted to bring the community literally into City Hall to help break down the disconnect that sometimes can happen, between administrations, both the city and the school side, and the people, because this is really, really serious stuff we're trying to do, because no one is here because they're satisfied with the condition of public education in Richmond. Nobody's here for that reason. You know, we're here because we want to see change for our kids, you know, and for our families, and also understanding that there are really very few urban communities in the United States who successfully pulled off what we aspire to in Richmond and what our citizens have been asking for us, you know, at every level, whether you're a school board member, city council member, the mayor, or you know, just a member of a civic association organization. People want to see change and progress, and that's why we're here, is to create an ongoing conversation that will contribute to change and progress. So in terms of the structure, there are three pieces. There's the quarterly meetings between the mayor, city council, and the school board, and the superintendent also attends that. And that's just to make sure that there's regular dialogue going on between the governing bodies with respect to issues that relate to education. And you know, the way our structure is set up, school board has authority for making policy and the responsibility to set the policy direction of schools, but they don't have their own funding. The funding body ultimately rests with the city council, and then the mayor has the power to introduce the budget. So I think it is already proven to be really helpful to make sure those groups are talking, not just an ad hoc basis or when a conflict or controversy comes up on a regular basis. So that's already started. The first one was in December. There was another one in January, and that will continue quarterly all year long for the rest of this term, with the next one being in April. The second piece is what we're calling the Children's Cabinet. This is modeled off the Governor's Children's Cabinet, that when Governor McAuliffe had his term, Ms. Bridges was involved with that, Ms. Acita was involved with that. And that was basically recognizing there are lots of agencies that are touching families in the city of Richmond in different ways, but they're not necessarily communicating or collaborating with one another to the degree that would really make the most sense for service delivery and for solving problems. So it's basically some of the key leaders on the city side who are responsible for running agencies that touch kids. So those would be Parks and Recs, social services, the library, the Office of Community Wealth Building, which leads the city's workforce development efforts, the human services entity as a whole, and then really the superintendent and his key administrative team. And so just to give you an update on that, that group did start meeting in October, had I think 4 quite good conversations with Superintendent Krantz and his team when he was the interim. And then the Superintendent Cameras asked that we put that on hold while he's still assembling his full team. So when that gets done, he's ready to go, we will reassemble that group. But I think it's really already proven to be productive to have folks who are all trying to do a lot of the same things, talking with one another, and at least being available where are the resources that are already available, so there can be better coordination, and then where appropriate, better planning and just do some good projects together. We will be hearing in this group a lot more about the cabinet and its work and some of the specific policy areas that they're working on as we go forward. Okay, and then finally there's this piece which is tonight, which consists of there'll be 12 citizens, 6 who are appointed by the school board, 6 appointed by the mayor with the consent of council and school board. The mayor has 2 representatives, the superintendent 2 representatives, 3 members of city council, 3 members of school board. And the first thing to say loud and clear, many of you were very tuned into the conversation, the nuances of the conversation we had, that maybe others of you were not. But this is an advisory board. It's not a policy-making body. It does not infringe upon or affect the governing power of the school board or city council or the mayor, for that matter. This is an additional group to have a conversation that we feel hasn't been adequately happening and has unnecessarily led to conflict and dead ends in the past. So we're going to, in broad terms, explore how to create a holistic community-wide strategy to improve education in the city, and then think about practical steps that might move that forward. And as we see fit, perhaps make advisory recommendations which the councils and school board are free to accept or reject. But this is not a policy-making body, and if you want to talk about school-specific issues, go to the school board meeting. If you want to talk about council-specific meeting, go to council meeting. This is about the intersection of those two things, recognizing that we all have to work together. So I'm going to stop talking shortly, but I just want to hit on 5 kind of high-level goals about why when we want to do the compact as a whole, and also specifically this group. One is to address the needs of the whole child, and by that we understand that children spend a number of hours each day in the school building, but they also spend a lot of time outside the school building, and there's also time when school is out or the summertime. All of it is important in a child's development, and we have to pay attention to all of it, especially when we have a context of 40% childhood poverty, and we know that many of our families don't have the resources to provide things for their kids that a more affluent community would do as a matter of course. So, we have to pay attention to what goes on outside the school building, but we also have to pay attention to what goes out at home and in the community, and trying to help families and parents improve their own situation as a way to help the kids. The second is to be a venue for setting some broad goals as a community. We don't want us to be here to meet. We don't want to be running the place forever. We have to put some goals out there. And we understand, once again, the school board absolutely, through their strategic planning process, through the superintendent's leadership, and the support of the school board, will establish a strategic plan and goals. Likewise, it's the mayor's responsibility every year when he puts his budget document to establish goals for each of the agencies. All we're doing here in this compact as a whole is taking those 2 plans together so we can see it all in one place in a way that really has never been done before. The third thing is telling the truth about what our kids need, and building up that community understanding, but also an understanding, within the walls of this building, that to really do what we say we want to do, to really improve urban education in a big way, it's a challenge, and we have to not hide from that. And the hope is that, hey, what we need to do, it's not all about dollars, as Ms. Burks has pointed out to me correctly, but sometimes dollars really are involved, and we have to understand that and tell the truth to ourselves if we want any chance to do right by our kids. The fourth thing, keeping the community focused on the top priorities. If we say we're about kids in the community, we can't just be talking about it once a year at budget time. We have to be talking about it year-round. And that this very existence of this meeting will assure that that's the case year-round, help keep the community's attention on this critical set of issues, which I think most people really say is our number one issue. And the last thing is changing the tone or improving the tone of our civil discourse here in Richmond. We know we have severe challenges. We know that people sit in different places and have different interests and perspectives depending on where they sit. And we also know there's not enough resources to go around. And the problems are really hard. That can be a recipe for conflict. And conflict is not always a bad thing. Disagreement is actually a good thing. Disagreement and working through issues is in general a healthy process. But when it becomes toxic, when it becomes personal, when it becomes political in the bad sense, then problems don't get solved. And so my hope is that this group, as it moves forward, will model a civil discourse between community leaders who are dead serious about helping our kids, but also committed to working together collaboratively, in a spirit of goodwill and generosity to have the tough conversations we need to have. So those are the goals. I'll leave it there. If anybody wants to add anything, any questions, or to Dr. Newbill, Liz, Mr. Jones, add anything, feel free.
Probably, and plus I couldn't be that brief. No, I'm kidding.
I would just add, I think it is covered and encompassed in these broader goals, but I see the compact, in addition, is being a place where we can talk about areas where the city and schools can work together, because too often even it's hard for me to get the plot of land mowed next to the school because it's owned by the city, but it's on the school property. I mean, that's a small example, but I think there are a lot of, we tend to think about these things in silos, and to the extent there are opportunities to work together. I love your example of like the RVA Future Center as an example of something that could be accomplished through this committee as a recommendation.
Anyone else? Yes.
I just have a logistical question about how often this group is going to meet, and if it's possible for us to pick a certain time and just have it be that, like plan the dates in advance. I have to leave in like 5 minutes because I have 2 other meetings to go to tonight. So.
Yes, and we do have that slated to talk about at the end before we leave tonight.
Okay.
Just so you know, what we were going to propose was this time frame, the 3rd Tuesday of the month, for the next 3 months to try to see if that works for folks. But I'm happy to talk with you further about that.
It doesn't work for me.
Yeah. So we can definitely communicate more about that as well.
Okay.
If there are other times that might be better. But yes, we'd like to have a standing time for the next 3 months to make sure that we don't have to go through the scheduling every time.
That would be great. And I would love it if you would pick another night.
I also want to acknowledge that you had said in advance, and if anyone else, I think I said that in the email, we understand that this was not perfect timing for all 18. And so if folks need to come and go, we absolutely respect that and appreciate the time you could carve out tonight.
Great.
With that, I want to quickly introduce Elizabeth and also frame her conversation. Thad just talked about the Richmond-specific structure and purpose of this group, and we asked Elizabeth, who is with the Forum for Youth Investment, a national organization that works with children's cabinets and organizations supporting the whole child across the country, to zoom us back out and give us examples of where she has seen this working and working well in other communities, so we have something tangible to think about and talk about. And while she's doing that, in addition to timekeeping, if questions arise, if things that you feel you need more information come up, feel free to let us know, and I'll be recording some of that as well so that we can have follow-up occur based on what she's going through. Welcome, Elizabeth, and thanks again for being here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here, actually, despite the fact that I have to drive back into a snowstorm to go home, but I think it'll be fun. So hopefully we can just turn this into a conversation about some of the things that we are seeing around the country that really seem to resonate and work for groups similar to this one. So I'm just going to lay out a few things, and as I do, please just jump right in and ask questions or point out things that resonate here or that maybe don't resonate here. So I like to start with this just because I feel like we oftentimes in this country zoom right into that center of that target, and we spend a lot of time talking about the center of that target, and we sometimes fail to recognize, if we were thinking about it from our own child's perspective. I just sent my only child off to his first year of college, and I certainly, when I think about him, don't think only about his academic and vocational productivity, right? I think about his social and civic connections, his physical and emotional health and safety. And so it's really important when we're talking about whole child that we remember that there are all of these areas of development that we care about for our young people. So the other thing I would say is that our organization has been at this for, this is our 20th anniversary. And one of the things that our founder, Karen Pittman, talks a lot about is there's a lot of talk we do about, oh, look at this young person, they've beaten the odds and they've made it despite all of these other things that are going on in their lives. And we're really trying to help communities figure out how to shift our mindset from a few young people beating the odds to really all young people having changed odds. So let's change the odds so that all young people can get to adulthood with these sorts of outcomes in place. So, I mean, I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on these outcomes because I feel like everybody gets this and we all want these outcomes for our young people. But, as we go forward, if you're thinking about this and you go, oh yeah, but we're missing something here in Richmond that we really need to have, let me know. The other thing I would just say is, I think, Thad, what you talked about, that this is a group that can, and Liz, you mentioned this too, this is a group that can think about the things that surround school. So if you think of this cube as sort of the developmental white space that is a young person's existence, right? So from the time they wake up in the morning until the night, from the time they're born until they go off into adulthood, all of those outcomes that we say we care about, school only fills that one small portion of their lives. Maybe you add an after-school program and a preschool program on there somewhere, and it fills some more of the time. But what's happening in the rest of that developmental white space that we should be paying closer attention to? And so this is a group that I think is really well equipped to think about all of the space and time where young people are. So let's think about how to do that. This is just one more image to have in your head about how to think about this. So clearly, this education pipeline is critically important, and we know that that is really a centerpiece for a lot of where the development happens for young people. But if we think about what sorts of programs and services and supports young people need from the time they're little to the time they're big, we like to talk about sort of what's that insulation around the schools, what's that set of supports that are really age appropriate, that are seamless and that are handing kids off to one another, right? And doing that in more coordinated ways. And it's really hard. We've built a lot of complex silos to sort of take chunks of young people's lives and work on them without integrating all that stuff back together. So in reality, this is one county that actually went and mapped what it looks like to look inside of each of the sort of big systems that serve kids, think about what those programs or funding streams are, and think about what that would look like if it really mapped to a real child and their family. And so I see the role of groups like this as being to make better sense of this picture and make, can anybody think of what the challenge might be for this family with this current picture? Anyone have any thoughts?
Challenges in terms of having so many decisions to make, or challenges in terms of functioning from day to day, or know who's where and doing what, or challenges just keeping up with your schedule. I think I've lived a little bit of that.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, this is a challenge, right, for this family. And it's not only a challenge for the family, that part seems obvious, right? But it's a challenge for the people that are out there trying to do the good work in each of these systems to know whether they're even working at cross purposes with one another, or getting to the outcomes that they are intending to get to. And then for the people who are at the top here who are trying to lead those different systems, being able to report back on what the contribution that they made to outcomes is pretty darn hard if you haven't come together to have those kinds of shared goals and really can start to measure things together. So again, this group isn't going to do all of these things, but having these things in mind, yeah.
I'm just curious why mental health and probation are together.
So this happened to be Los Angeles County and the way that they set up their systems in their county government. That's just, yeah. Everybody does it differently, and this, by the way, was many years ago. So they probably have done something different with it since then.
So will that slide be used in connection to this group ever again? And I mean that in all sincerity.
No, the reason we put this up is to show, we call it the spaghetti slide or the tangled mess, or it's meant to give you that feeling of, oh my goodness, we have got to get our ducks in a row for young people, So no, you're not supposed to read this and understand the detail behind it.
No, I understand that. I'm just saying, will this ever be presented outside of this room again? I guess that's my point. That's offensive.
Oh, the mental health and probation.
I just don't think we want people to think we might even be in the broadest range even ever considering.
Yeah.
I uttered the same thing before you raised your hand.
Yes, so this is not meant to represent anything to do with Richmond. It really was just intended to illustrate the.
So that's a yes, that this will never be shown outside of this room again.
Yes, we do not have.
Yes. Okay, great.
All right. So if we all know that, we're trying to get to these big outcomes for young people, and we want to make sure that they're developmentally on track, they're productive, they're connected, they're healthy, all those things. We know that we've got to put the supports and services and systems in place in more coordinated, accessible, high-quality ways for them. It's going to take leaders coming together in new and different ways to think about how they align the people that are working in these spaces, the data that they have to know how they're doing with young people, and then the money that is being put to use in this work. So our belief is that, if you can really get leaders working differently together here, you can put these things in place in better ways, and you can then expect to see improved outcomes for young people. And the thing about this is the cutesy part of the gears turning. So the idea, of course, is that if you turn that gear, then turn that one faster. But the real thing to keep in mind here is that to get to improve child and youth outcomes, really changing entire trajectories of trend lines of how kids are doing, can take 5 to 10 years to see real change. What we end up doing, though, all across this country is moving on to something before we give it a chance to work. Doing the real strengthening of the systems can take 3 to 5 years, right? To really move big systems, to change from mental health and probation to another way of doing business in that one silo can take 3 to 5 years at least. To increase the capacity for change with the leaders is something that can happen sooner. And if you can do those things in ways that you're connecting dots, you can expect that if you do this, you're going to be able to predict getting to these other things. So it's just to emphasize the fact that you guys coming together is really critically important to be able to do this, and setting some long-term goals for yourselves is another important piece. So I lied. I'm showing it one more time. But the point is, if you can get leaders working together up here, you're going to be able to make better sense of these programs and systems, and in turn, change outcomes for the young people. And how they turn again. And we're done with that. Okay, now we're moving into a moment of discussion for you all. And instead of having you get up, because I think that'll take us too much time, if you could turn to somebody who is sitting next to you. And this is something that we use to just make sure we're thinking about all of the roles that can play a part. So when we talk about leaders, we're not just talking about elected officials, we're talking about people who are leaders in these different roles, right, around the outside here, and then people who are leaders of particular services and systems, or in their own organization are a leader, or as a parent can sit at a table like this and be a leader, or as a young person can sit at a table like this and be a leader. So think about and discuss with the person next to you which role you see yourself in. So the roles, again, are this gray part around the outside. And then which service or system you feel like you have the most expertise in. And then I'd love to hear out loud from the group after you do this where you hope to learn from your peers. So which service and system or role do you feel like, I don't know a whole lot about that, and so I'd love to get input from somebody who does. So take Kim, where are you? You got some sort of okay, 5 minutes. Take 5 minutes to turn to the person next to you and just have a quick discussion.
Public policy, and still being within the faith-based community as well, I want to learn more about how civil rights impacts education, because my colleague and I, we've been dealing with, for so much it's black and white, but in our district it's brown, and to not have bilingual resources in 2018 is, and then to hear the same rhetoric or the same narrative that we've heard come out of the Affirmative Action Act. We can't find qualified female candidates, and we don't know how to find African American candidates. To hear that used as any type of rationale for hiring bilingual staff and or having bilingual resources in 2018 is interesting. So I want to understand, again, as a legislator, how, where does civil rights come into this piece right here. Because again, we often think black and white and everything is great, but again, there's still, I mean, even as we look around the makeup of this table, it's very black and white. ¿Qué pasa, amigo? Bueno, but again, you know, we don't have the varied shades that are representative within our city, even at this table as we sit down. And again, that's a civil rights issue, civil rights discussion.
I think for me, I think we put too much emphasis on the pure academic education of our kids. And there's so many of our kids that aren't excited about learning. They don't see any reason to really learn. And so you have to create that excitement for learning. And there's got to be a dialogue that is out of school time that supports what's happening in school time. And everybody's got to be on the same page. They can't go to a rec center and just run crazy and then come back to school and run crazy in school. Everybody's got to be on the same page with basically the same value system and the same outcome, but doing it in a different venue. And that's what's got to be lined up in my belief thinking. It's all got to...
Community-based organizations,
Yeah,
maybe?
it's all got to be.
From that perspective, okay.
I think for me, one of the areas that I'm looking to learn more about is the K through 12 education, the practice piece, and how it is, how the other pieces impact how it can address the overall student. What are the limitations, the restrictions from just the education practice piece when it comes to looking at the whole child? I think back to my own experience. What are the limitations that a teacher has that keeps them from reaching beyond just that educational, academic piece when they see a child has other needs? Those types of things, supports for that. There are a lot, I mean, just as simple, basic things as touch. In this day and time, I mean, I grew up in a time where you could go home with your, for a sleepover with your teacher. And, we can't do that anymore, and I understand why. But just understanding what some of those restrictions are and hindrances, and how some of those affect how you bridge that, the academic piece to the overall whole child, which in turn affects the academic performance and their ability to be educated effectively when you have these other outside the classroom issues that may not be addressed.
I want to first say muchísimas gracias, Councilman Jones. And I too, civil rights issue, and I'm always interested in when we talk about whether whole child or the after-school programs, one of the things that I'm hoping that we're able to have hard conversations around how the racial conflict between the African American students and Latino students, how that creates a barrier to learning. So one of the ways that there's a couple of really good, a program that has been developed, because if we're talking about civil rights and we're talking about racial conflict, it has to come down, we have to acknowledge that there's some trauma healing that has to happen, because regardless of what we come up with or what the communities, we have to learn to address that thing, and even in professional development with teachers and administration. Any barrier to that would work to begin that trauma healing process.
Could I say one more thing too? I think it would be important to come up with a description of what that whole child should look like. Not physically, but everything it takes for us to say that whole child is slated for potentially good future. Because if we can identify that and then see honestly what we have, then how does the school fit into that? How does the after school, how does all the agencies fit into that? And what is their role and responsibility?
I'm glad you said that, because this kind of a group is really important for a couple reasons. One, you can tackle issues that a school board or a city council or various city agencies can't tackle on their own. But the only way you can do it is by people sort of acknowledging and articulating what their role is in the group and who's taking ownership of which pieces. And so as soon as you can possibly get to spending one of these meetings really writing down what those goals are for young people, what outcomes you want to get to. And I'm going to pivot in a second to show you a couple of examples, because I don't think you should start from scratch. I've watched people start from scratch, and that's a painful experience, and it's good to sort of take what other communities have done and make it your own and tweak it and work with it. But we know about young people's development and what makes for success, and so you should start from there. So I'm going to keep us moving and give you just a couple of examples. Now I say children's cabinets, that's sort of code for any coordinating body at the state or local level that comes together in a cross-sector way to work on children's issues and to set common goals. So if I use the word children's cabinet, I hope it's not going to confuse folks that there is a children's cabinet that is working here in Richmond, but this group I think is a real added value to that sort of inside city agency coordination. You're going to bring the community angle to that work. So I only am going to give you two examples, and I'll tell you what those are in just a second. But what do these bodies do? We've seen them being set up increasingly at the local level. I manage a network of about 20 states that have something like a children's cabinet at the state level, like the one you had here in Virginia. But more and more cities and counties are putting them together too. And they work to do these kinds of things, to coordinate policies and systems, to really align the resources and generate new resources when necessary, to do what you said about committing to common outcomes that you want to see for young people, and then to share data across sectors. And then to engage community stakeholders, because obviously you all 18 at this table aren't the whole community, and so finding ways to do that is going to be important. All with this goal of improving the well-being of young people. And to just state it really simply, I really think that if you can focus on coordinating and aligning people and the partnerships that you're in, the data, and then the money, you are going to get yourselves a lot further, a lot faster if those three areas are coordinated. So these are the current sort of cities and counties that we're tracking and writing up sort of what they're doing to have bodies like this working in their cities. And so I was just going to tell you a little bit about Fairfax County and about Denver, because I think there's some things that are similar to what are going on here. So in Denver, the mayor created a children's cabinet, much like LeVar Stoney did here in Richmond, and it is tasked with doing those kinds of things that I just articulated a second ago. It was done in executive order. Was the Richmond one? That was an executive order, right? I think it was. Thad just walked out the door. What? No, it wasn't an executive order?
Multi-step process. No.
Okay. So sometimes they're created that way, sometimes in legislation, sometimes just convened, so.
Yeah, we each passed resolutions.
Okay.
Mayor had a letter, council passed a resolution, school board passed a resolution, after meeting and determining that that's
Okay.
the route that everybody wanted.
Great. So that's a good way to tackle it as opposed to just popping up with an executive order. The structure there is very similar to the one that Thad just laid out for the children's cabinet here. Denver's got a lot going on. It's a pretty big city, and so they've got a lot of different additional stakeholders on it, but it's similar to the folks that are on this Richmond Children's Cabinet. They have sort of committed to 6 big areas that they want to see improvements in: early childhood education, 3rd grade reading level, healthy weight, post-secondary pathways, improving opportunities for disconnected youth, and then a basic needs sort of goal area. And so everything that they're doing is focused on those particular areas. In terms of data, they are really trying to get down to the neighborhood level to understand neighborhood by neighborhood how kids are doing and what kinds of opportunities they have or don't have based on a bunch of different indicators that they're tracking. So this is really useful for them because then when they sit down as a cabinet, they can really look at the data and understand. So they've got a 100-page book that goes along with this. There's a geographer on staff in the Office of Children's Affairs there that does very detailed data work to really understand neighborhood by neighborhood how kids are doing. What's really exciting about what Denver has done is they don't only collect that data on how kids are doing, but they've started now to collect the fiscal data from the city to say, okay, if we know how kids are doing neighborhood by neighborhood, do we also know what it is as a city across all of these different agencies we are investing neighborhood by neighborhood? And so they can then layer on, how kids are doing is still in the blue shaded, but these little bubbles are showing them what investments they're making. This happens to be a graph that I pulled that shows out of school time investments, meals served per site, and per pupil funding. So, or for Head Start, sorry. And so they can start to look at that and think, okay, are we doing the right thing in the way we invest, and over time, are we making any difference when we invest in certain neighborhoods with certain opportunities? So there's some really cool things you can start to do with data to actually be intentional about where the resources are going and how you're trying to move the needle on indicators. So that was Denver. Just I'll pause there if there were any comments or thoughts on Denver.
So did they adjust for income in those areas? Because I imagine some of the areas of abundant opportunity probably align with higher income areas, which you would expect that there might be less city resources within those areas. Do you know how they adjusted for that?
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the indicators, right, that they're looking at. And Denver, like many cities, is having a real challenge with gentrification, and so they are trying to also use the data to track that. So it's not just that, oh, kids are doing better in this neighborhood because it's been gentrified, but trying to track that stuff and be able to make sure that the resources are going to where the kids of highest need are. So I thought I'd share a little bit about Fairfax, and then we can get into some discussion. So Fairfax is, I think, more similar to this group in that they were put together for the same kinds of reasons, right? But they are made up of county government, school leadership, and community members. So that sounds and feels like this group, right? And what they have done is they've set their thank you all so much for your bravery. They have set up a vision for what they want to see happen in Fairfax County, and then articulated what this group's, and I'm going to say this group because it's sort of akin to what they're doing, this group's mission is. So I would advise you all to sort of articulate your vision and your mission. The vision is, of course, what you want to see for kids. The mission is how you're going to do it. To the point about the outcomes, they've articulated sort of these big goals that they have for young people along the ages and along the developmental areas. And so you should have something like that for this group at some point. They have put resources behind it, so there is a backbone entity, meaning between these meetings, someone is going to be responsible for putting the agendas together and connecting folks and finding dates that work and all of that boring stuff, but also the, you know, the glue, that connective glue behind the scenes that helps, you know, answer people's questions and connect dots and things. They also have set aside a small fund they call the Partners in Prevention Fund that is to do some of those innovations that are coming out of this group. It's not a big amount of money, but it is a small fund, so they can do some things, community meetings, community conversations, those kinds of things. So the other thing I would say is, and this is, I think, relevant for you all, is that folks who are involved with the Virginia Children's Cabinet will know there was a fiscal map done at the state level that goes into great detail. This is just one of the images out of it, but it tells you sort of what the state is investing in a whole range of child and youth issues. And so what Fairfax is planning to do, and I would, you know, advise this group to think about it too, is they're doing their own fiscal mapping at the local level that connects up to this state map so that you can really have a full understanding of the funding picture in your city. And we could talk more at another point about whether that's something that this group is interested in seeing have happen. But okay, so I'm going to pause. Denver and Fairfax, just two examples out of that map of what's happening. Do any of those things resonate with what you see this group doing? Is there stuff that's missing from those examples I gave that you feel like this group needs to tackle right away? Yeah.
One of the things I noticed was that Denver, in terms of their goals, appeared a little bit more measurable and concrete, and Fairfax appeared a little bit more broad. Mm-hmm. And I don't know which one has been around longer, but any information on outcomes on either of those?
So it could just be the examples of the particular slide I told to show you, but both Denver goes deep for sure in those maps and everything that you saw with the indicators that connect to those outcomes. Fairfax has those as well. I didn't put them up here.
So maybe that was just more of an
that was sort of the
overview
broad community outcomes, things we want to see for young people, and then underneath that they have a lot of detailed measures. They did a retreat where they invited the community in about 5 months ago, and they had, you know, a data gallery walk with all of the trend lines. I think there were something like 36 trend lines that they put up and had people give input on, you know, why was this particular indicator going in that direction or whatever. And that would be the kind of stuff that you could start to do with this group as well.
I have a question, but I need to, where'd he go?
I know.
I was going to
I don't know, where did they
that.
I just said the same thing. Where'd they go?
We're in charge, okay.
Let me go see if I can grab it.
So my question was, Thad was very clear that we're an advisory group.
Mm-hmm.
And if we have an education question or issue, take it to the school board.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I'm going to need clarification, because this is very similar to all the charts that we all look at and we all see. However, the one thing specific to Richmond
Mm-hmm.
is, as Councilman Jones mentioned, there's nowhere in there for the specific issues for the brown population or the non-English speaking population, in that, for example, in Richmond, we have your school, elementary school, Green Elementary. It's 85% Latino or higher. Yeah. And the same, and you can go all across. So, and I can guarantee you that the faculty or the staff does not reflect that group. So when we're talking about this, Thad.
Yes.
So I was asking about clarification when we start looking, getting down to writing the mission, the vision, and if we adapt some type of fiscal map like this, would this be the place to discuss where the brown children or the non-English families, you see the non-English families or family support services, I'm very surprised at how little there is. I mean, as long as this is up, I just wanted to direct our attention to family support services, and more than anything, more and more the mental health, again, like right now, the gun debate, or the Confederate, I mean, we have specific issues.
Right. So I would say, and Michelle, please weigh in since you're here for superintendent. I mean,
She's saying, should that be addressed here, or should it be addressed at the school board, or?
So I would say if it's about school-specific policy, it's a school board issue. But if it's about stepping back and analyze what's going on, I think conversation can take place here. But I would be leery of just seeing a pie chart like that and drawing conclusions about what's going on. I think we need to have a dialogue with administrators and others who actually create this budget, so that who are actually responsible for that area. And I think that could be a venue for that. So if we decided that we want to make diversity, inclusion, issues regarding Hispanic and Latino students a primary focus of this group, I think that's fine. But then we go on to have the dialogue with.
Absolutely.
So is that helpful?
Well,
Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify,
Yeah.
this was the place to have those discussions. Again, not looking at policy.
Yeah, I mean, understanding what our kids need, and to the extent that's an important need, yeah, let's have that honest conversation.
Well, and
So-
go ahead.
I think if we leave this table without talking about all 24,000 of our
Yeah.
children in the inclusivity, diversity across the city footprint, we will not have done our job. There's a market value analysis that was done, that there's some overlay that we should know exactly where, down to the block,
Street,
if
yeah.
we can, with all of the assets and the inventory. How do we begin to make recommendations if we don't have clarity? I know that I don't have a large Latino population in the East End, but there's a large one on this house. And understanding so that when we make recommendations, that they really are responsive to the realities throughout our city. I don't know how we could.
So to that point, the reason I bring it up, because.
So I'm agreeing with you.
I know.
I think that's where we
Yeah,
are.
but
Sorry, I should
no.
have said that first.
Yeah, no, I agree, but just again for clarity, I've attended the forum, that Know Your Rights forum, that Congressman McEachin had. And if we remember at the time, it was for African American communities. And I stood up at that time and I said, if the Latino voice is not included, and how can we move, because I've also heard it from City Council, that Richmond is committed to moving forward with intention. But each time I've heard that, I have not heard it has been the black or white. The Latino voice hasn't. I'm just, no.
Yeah, okay.
I'm just saying
All the way
from,
back.
sure.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I got you.
I want you to finish. Maybe we
Okay.
should step back a little bit and figure out what is the outcome we're hoping to get from this particular meeting. I feel like we're super in the weeds with not a lot of direction on what we're supposed to do for today, and I don't think that's helpful for all of us as we move forward for kids and families.
Yes, I think that's right, but I think it's good to start to hear
To
what some
clarify.
of
That's
the.
what I'm-
Yeah, so like what?
the
Yeah,
hot-
because the only thing I heard her saying was just, is this the place?
Is this right?
If
Yeah.
not,
Yeah.
then where do I go? And that's really, that's what I heard, that's what I'd say.
Yeah.
But I'd
exactly
like
this the
Kim,
place.
I'd like
I
Kim,
agree.
maybe if you gave us some more direction about the outcomes the mayor's hoping for, the city council's hoping for. I think that gives us a more pointed.
A better perspective
Perspective
versus.
for conversation, right?
Yeah, the agenda for tonight was designed around the idea of trying to help get our hands around what these groups do. Elsewhere, not that elsewhere is perfect, but tangible examples of what they can do, so that in subsequent meetings, you guys can get your hands around particular issues that you feel are the issues that are missing from the conversation that really address the needs of our whole student,
And just
our whole child. Does
to
that
give- Yeah,
make-
I think, just to give you one tangible example from Fairfax about how this same issue that you're raising really came up and came out of that table that I just showed you and actually ended up, so they call it One Fairfax. It's a equity policy resolution that the table that's like this came up with and sent to both the school board and the county council and got endorsement of from both of those bodies. And now the whole of Fairfax government, schools and county, are working on this equity policy and digging into all of the policies in the county and really analyzing them to see where there are things that are happening that are, creating inequity in the county. So in at least that example, it's a table like this that sort of surfaces ideas and gets them put in front of the elected officials. You and then you.
And you've got a minute,
okay.
Elizabeth. I didn't know.
So quick question. So you gave us the two examples, Fairfax and Denver. Previous to that, you gave a slide showing that, in actuality, it'll take about 5 to 10 years for you to see it in action. So then my question then is, how long have the Fairfax and the Denver groups been working?
Yeah.
So.
No, that's a good question. So Denver began, I want to say 2012, if my memory is right.
Okay.
And Fairfax began 3 or 4 years ago. So that would be around that same 2014 or something like that. And I think they are really starting to see better, certainly in the leader gear, they're seeing improved ways that they operate. I'd say Denver has collected all the information. They are right now starting to see real changes in the way kids are experiencing programs and services. And so I think they're on the cusp of seeing the changes in outcomes for kids. So by things that they've done. Yeah. So I think I wanted to make sure that I left you with just some of the lessons learned of just when you're getting started like this stuff, boring kind of stuff that you have to put in place and think about, not in your first meeting, but potentially in your second meeting. Just to make sure that questions as they come up like this, sort of what your move is, how this group is going to operate and what kinds of decisions and decision-making style you're going to use. So, things around, are you going to do things by consensus decision-making? Are you going to endorse ideas and send them to the two bodies? How are you going to do that? How are you going to structure these meetings? I think you have to structure them open, right? Isn't that?
Yes.
That's and then how that came up already, very first thing, what's the timeline for meetings and how do you put those in place? Are you going to require that if you're going to make an endorsement or something that you have to have a quorum here, or are you going to have designees? All of these kinds of questions about how this body is going to work, you just need to start ironing all of that out. Are you going to have work groups that are temporary or permanent or not at all? Are you going to have chairs and co-chairs and vice chairs? Is that something that you want to do? Who's going to provide the staffing? I know you're only here for how many more months?
Depending on what this group says.
Right. And then who's going to facilitate meetings? So these are all kinds of things that you just need to be thinking about in your next meeting, and we can send you stuff that might be helpful on that. So that was one thing I wanted to make sure I left you with. You're going to want to put some ground rules together. This is one from another community, and I just thought it was worth throwing that up there so that you can, bring your own set of ground rules into the room every time you meet. You want to articulate what the roles of members are, and I think these are worth sort of thinking about for a moment. Maybe I'll let everybody just digest this for a moment rather than me say them all. Yeah.
I have a question regarding the information that you're sharing. Will it be available after this meeting? Okay.
Yeah, yeah, for
Okay,
sure.
'cause I'm like, okay, I want to go back and look at that, okay.
And so I facilitate the Fairfax meetings, and I'd say every third meeting, I will actually get everybody to go around the room and say, okay, what is one thing between these meetings that you have done to fulfill your role as a member of this group? So what is one thing outside of the meeting that you've done? And then they can start to hear from each other and hear how they are, sort of embodying the intent of that work in their day jobs. So, we're, okay. So I think this is the last slide that I was gonna leave folks with. At the end of this deck, I've got some tools that you can use to do things like get to the outcomes, or start to think about what data you have available here in Richmond, or to start doing the fiscal mapping. And so those things will be in there, and you can use them if you like. So hopefully that gave you not too much to think about in the first meeting, but it's a foreshadowing of some things that you're going to need to come together on.